Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us today. This is the Building and Fire Board of Appeals General Meeting of October 19, 2022. May I have the roll call, please?
Tatulian. Lee.
Present.
Kashishian.
Here.
Galstian.
Present.
Anesian.
Here.
Yes, please.
Reporting regarding posting of agenda. The agenda for the Building and Fire Board of Appeals will be posted on October 12, 2022 on the Building Board outside City Hall and on the city's website. Item 3, presentations and accommodations. We have building and safety updates by Miroslav Slavsky, their building official, and also item B for fire prevention. We have our fire marshal, Foster McLean.
Good afternoon. No real updates other than Energov is continuing to flow. We are successful in taking in permits and processing permits and submittals. And we continue to work with that system and develop that system to a greater extent. And so considering now it is a success. That concludes my updates. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fire prevention.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the board. I'd like to take this time to talk about a couple questions, or answer a couple questions from last time. There were questions about outdoor dining, and I was going to go back and get some information about the city programs for the outdoor dining. There's 2 programs currently. One is the Al Fresco Glendale program. That's with the Economic Development Department. And for that program, the contact person is Alan Castillo. So if anybody would like to get a permit and more information about the Al Fresco Glendale program, they would contact Alan and Economic Development. Second program is a sidewalk dining program. That's with our Public Works Engineering Department. So if someone would like to apply for a permit for sidewalk dining, they would go through Public Works Engineering. The second question was about fire code changes for solar panels. There hasn't been any significant changes. What was added to the fire code is called Building Integrated Photovoltaic. Those are for the roofing tiles that have integrated solar panel into them. So that was added into the fire code. Other than that, there hasn't been any other significant changes to solar panels within the fire code. That's the end of the fire prevention updates. Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you say roofing tiles integrated with solar panels?
Correct. So the fire code has added that into the fire code to account for those types of solar panels that will be added to the roofs of the structures.
So are we referring to those solar panels that act as a roofing tile as well?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And those are Class A rated?
I'm not familiar about the rating on them. They would have to be in Glendale to be installed in our fire hazard area.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Agenda item 4, approval minutes. Minutes of the Building and Fire Board of Appeals meeting of September 21, 2022.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I second.
Thank you.
Oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The Building and Fire Board of Appeals Commission may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. I don't see any calls, so on to item 6, old business. Item A, proposed local amendments to Title 24 CCR for the 2023 Glendale Building and Safety Code. Project description, public hearing to enable building official and fire marshal to present proposed local amendments to Title 24 CCR, which would take effect commencing on January 1st, 2023. We have city staff available. Chris Agus is going to be making a short presentation. Not as long as last time, I would assume, but
Before we proceed, we didn't do a roll call for the minutes?
oh, I'm so sorry. Back to item 4, approval of minutes. Roll call. Tulian, Lee,
Yes.
Kashishian,
Yes.
Galastian,
Yes.
Hanessian.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner. My apologies. Old business, back to item 6. If I could have Chris Agus.
Ready? Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, everybody. Chairman Kashishian and board members. We're just going to do a short presentation here just to summarize basically what we discussed the last time. So it's hopefully be a short presentation. Which one am I pointing at? Is it working? Oh, okay, there you go. All right, perfect. Okay, so the California Building Standards, as we all know, is the Building Standards Code, which comprises of 12 distinct parts. And the California Building Standard establishes the minimum standards by which buildings and building systems shall be designed and constructed, and to ensure public safety. The California Building Standards are general standards that are applicable throughout the state without any consideration for local conditions. So as far as the Title 24 CC&Rs, which is the California Code of Regulations, also known as the California Building Standard Codes, comprises of 12 parts, and here are the 12 parts, and then Part 7 is reserved, so we don't have a Part 7. Okay, so as far as local adoption, these are the health and safety codes that allow us to amend the Building Standards Code. As far as local jurisdiction, they may amend the building standards to address local geologic, topographic, or climatic conditions. And as far as amendments, they must be at least as protective as a statewide statute. And these amendments and justifications must be filed with the California Building Standards Commission. And then as well as any amendments to the energy standards must be certified by the California Energy Commission before enforcement. And at this presentation, we don't have any energy standard amendments. As far as the local enforcements of the Glendale Building Safety Code 2023, it may not occur prior to January 1, 2023. So we can't adopt it before that date. As far as our Glendale Building and Safety Code currently, which was adopted by ordinance number 5937, we have basically comprises of 9 volumes, actually 10, if you count volume 1A and 1B. So these are the 9 volumes that we have for you today. Okay, so as far as what's new for 2023, essentially our code amendments is a carryover code with very little changes from our current codes. And most of that added amendments are in volume 6. As far as our Glendale Building Safety Codes, there's been a regional efforts to standardize local codes, which has resulted in greater uniformity among our neighboring cities. And again, some of our local amendments have been eliminated because California codes have caught up. So every 3 years, there's always a few of those codes that catch up that we can't eliminate. So our goal is, to try to minimize our amendments as much as we can. And again, like I said earlier, a small number of it has been added or revised mainly in the fire standards, which is volume 6. Try that again. All right, so as far as, we're gonna go into now to each of the volumes and just highlight a few things. As far as volume 1A of the building standards, the proposed amendments in volume 1A are similar to that of the 2020 Glendale Building Safety Code. And there were no significant changes, and this should say not residential, but building standards. And then volume 1B, again, it's similar. No proposed amendments are similar to that of the 2020 Glendale Building Safety Code. And then there's also no significant changes to the building standards here. Same thing with volume 1C. No changes, and it's similar to 2020 Glendale Building Safety Code. Volume 2, 3, and 4, again, the amendments are the same. There's no significant changes to these electrical standards, MUP standards. Okay, with that, now we're in volume 5. In volume 5, the proposed amendments are again similar to that of the 2020 building code. And then with volume 6, I have here Gabe Riza, who will just talk a few minutes about it.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, out of the 41 amendments amended to the fire code, we chose to just highlight 2 of the most significant items. The first one was the allowance of a new sprinkler design, the NFP 13R design, which allows developers an additional choice of sprinkler system for their development, and the complete revamping of the Chapter 49 wildland urban interface requirements, the WUI regulations, better restrictions on brush clearance and vegetation management.
Okay, moving on to volume 7. These are the security standards. Again, these are similar to the 2020, and there are no significant changes to the security standards. Volume 7, or volume 8, is the commercial industrial property maintenance codes, and this is also similar and with no significant changes. Volume 8, which is the building standards, again, these are similar, and then there are no changes or no new amendments to volume 9. And so as a summary, these are a timeline of where we are. We are in October 19th, which is the Fire Boards of Appeal hearing. Hopefully after today, we can go and proceed to the City Council on November 1st, which we will then adopt hopefully on November 15th. And with all of that, the code will be in effect of January 1, 2023. So any projects submitted for Plan Tech after January 1 or January 1 and forward will be subject to the new current codes. All right, so this is again the timeline written out. We're here at the final presentations to the Building and Fire Board for adoption. And again, effective date January 1, 2023. And if anyone here wants to purchase any portions of the building codes, they can reach out to International Code Council, and all of the California codes are available there. And then also for anyone wanting training available for the new codes, there are codes training throughout the year at icbolabc.org, which is also CalBO, and then ICC Safe. Those are some of the websites. You can have some local training for the new codes coming up. And with that, that concludes our presentation. And if anyone has any questions, we're here to stand by and answer those questions for you. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Did you receive any public comments? Any questions from the board members? All right. Well, yes.
Well, it says it's not changed that much. Stays like old code.
Amendments are the same.
Amendments,
as previous
so-
codes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Well, In that case, I would like to entertain a motion to make recommendation to City Council to adopt the amendments to Title 24 Code of Regulations as the 2023 Glendale Building and Safety Code.
I second.
Thank you.
Tulian. Lee.
Yes.
Tashishian.
Yes.
Galastian.
Yes.
Vanessian.
Yes.
Item 7, new business. Item A, appeal of 1470 Belane Drive building permit number BB2116642. Project description, public hearing on an appeal of the building official's revocation of building permit number BB2116642 to construct, legalize, 1, new wooden fences up to 7 feet tall, 2, an approximately 240 square foot new wooden deck, and 3, a new 36-inch tall concrete retaining wall on a property zoned R1R2, restricted residential zone, floor area district 2, located at 1470 Belane Drive. I would like to just state, to organize the way that this will be done is it'll go with city staff's presentation first. The appellant, Mr. Sukiazian, to go ahead and make his presentation. Then we'll do public comment, and then we'll be back to city staff and back finally to Mr. Sukiazian, the appellant, to have final words. Ask questions when you feel appropriate, and I turn it over to city staff, which would be Dennis Joe.
Good evening, Chair, members of the board. This item involves appeal of building officials' decision to revoke building permit number BB2116642. And my presentation will be a general overview of the building permit's history. And once again, this is the summary of the building permit is the legalization and construction of a wooden fence, an approximately 240 square foot wooden deck, and 36-inch concrete retaining walls. And to briefly go over the project site, the subject property is generally located in the Oakmont neighborhood west of the Country Club. And as you can see from this map here, it's zoned R1R, restricted residential floor area district 2. This is an aerial of the property. Shaded yellow is the subject site, and shaded in blue is the general location of the wooden deck. Just to go over a brief summary of the project history, during April 2021, a notice of violation was issued to the property owner in regards to the unpermitted wooden deck, as you see on this slide here. This notice was included with your packet this evening as exhibit number 1 for the notice of violation. And during August of 2021, an additional report was received by the Neighborhood Services Division in regards to the existing chain link fences along the southeastern interior property line were being removed, wooden slats were being installed, additional metal posts were being placed into the ground, retaining walls were being constructed, and later in August of 2021, a revised notice of violation regarding the ongoing unpermitted work was issued, and that revised notice was attached to your packet as exhibit number 2. And these are photographs of the wooden fence at various times. Prior to issuance of the building permit, the Planning Division had provided advisement to the property owner in regards to the zoning code, by which Table 3011B of the zoning code requires the interior setback for any new buildings or structured is at minimum 10 feet from the interior property line for a property zone in the R1R zone. And on your screen is Exhibit 7. It is modified and simplified just to focus on where it states that interior setback is exactly 10 feet for new buildings and structures. In this case here, we're talking about the unpermitted deck. Staff incorrectly interpreted that decks, which do not exceed no more than 18 inches above the lowest grade, or the lowest adjacent grade, should be allowed as an encroachment into the interior setback. Once again, is required as 10 feet. So this was an error on staff's part. during which in June 2022, this year, the building permit in question was issued by the building official, and that building permit is attached to your packet as exhibit number 4. And this is the of the building permit plans on the screen. So circa the time of issuance of the permit, the city received a letter from a law firm, Irvin, Cohen, and Jessup, objecting to the planning division's interpretation allowing decks that do not exceed 18 inches above grade as a permitted encroachment. And this letter received by the city was attached to your packet as exhibit number 3. As a result of receipt of that letter, the subject building permit and the Glendale Municipal Code, which was on the previous slide as table 3011B, were re-reviewed by staff, which the community development, with concurrence with the city attorney's office, formulated opinion that the reference section of the Glendale Municipal Code was not implemented properly, and the building permit was not in compliance with the zoning ordinance. And in turn, the planning division notified the building official of the error of this building permit approval by the planning division. And on June 30th, 2022, the building official issued a revocation letter to the property owner, which is attached to your packet as exhibit number 5. On the screen here is of the California Residential Code, which are critical code sections regarding 1, the validity of permits, and 2, the suspensions and revocation section of the building code. So which by number 1, which is the validity of permit, which reads, the issuance or granting of a permit shall not be construed to be a permit for or an approval of any violation of any of the provisions of this code, and with emphasis of any other ordinance of the jurisdiction, e.g. the zoning code. And number 2, so this in regards to suspension and revocation section, it reads, the building official is authorized to suspend or revoke permits issued under the provisions of this code wherever the permit is issued in error or on the basis of incorrect or inaccurate or incomplete information, or, with emphasis added, in violation of any ordinance, and once again, e.g. the zoning code, or regulation or any other provisions of this code. So in reference of these 2 sections of the residential code, the building official had revoked the building permit. This concludes my presentation of a brief history of the building permit project, or this project. And I'm available for any questions if you had any at the moment. And once again, the appellant will have their time to come up, and if further questions arise, I'll have my second chance to come up here if you had any further clarification. So if you have any questions for me, I'd be glad to answer at the moment.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Can I ask a few quick questions? So was some of the work already underway and taken before the permit was applied for?
That is correct. So at the beginning of my slide of the permit history, it just demonstrated of the unpermitted work. We noticed, and we had issued notice of violations, and then a re-notice came out about additional work happening. It was ongoing. And then once again, staff was trying to work with the property owner, and eventually a building permit was issued, and so forth. It unraveled, and it was revoked.
So it's fair to say unauthorized work, violation, permits issued, whether erroneously or not, and then re-reviewed and revoked.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Not at this time. Okay.
I did want to add one item just for housekeeping. The exhibits that Dennis Joe referenced, our items are 1 through 7. I mistakenly added Exhibit 8 underneath the appellant, and that's actually just photos that were submitted by city staff. So your Exhibit 8 is technically part of city staff report, not the appellant. And at this time, if there's no further questions of the city staff member, I'd like to invite Mr. Sukiazian up to the stand.
Joseph. Thank you for your time, Board of Building and Safety, and the staff that's here today to take the time to review my case. I come to you today to give you a little background. My name is Artin Sukazian. I've resided at 1470 Villain Drive with my wife for 17 years. I'm a father of 3 kids and faithful husband, and more importantly, a great contributor to the community of Glendale. Pre-pandemic, we had a tree fall on our house, oak tree. We have many oak trees in our yard, which are protected trees. And long story short, the city arborist recommended that we open up a lot of the canopy. The fungus issues that resulted in us having to cut down 5 trees that she recommended, oak trees, many of them were oak trees. Fungus issues resulted from too much moisture and not enough sunlight. So we started to open the canopy up. And along that way, the only place to put a deck to view the country club, and it's a nice setting up there. It's a flat portion of land, is up near the neighbor's property, but it's inside of our property. And I will note that when they talk about encroachment and things like that, his entire pool wall, 120 feet, the city has been great about differentiating civil matters as compared to matters that would be within their purview. But conversely, it's been much different. The neighbor happens to be a judge and has harassed my family for many years now. And the fence that was previously there was approved by the city, got revoked as well 4 years later. And is it just coincidence that he threatens and then a few days after I get a permit, it gets revoked? Or is that truly what's happening is the intimidation and harassment by the judge is making progress within the city and utilizing city resources to do such a thing, because at that point it's a civil matter. I have communication with the planning department, with the city of Glendale, about it being okay less than 18 inches from the ground at grade deck in terms of the encroachment of the 10-foot setback. And I would like to say during COVID, I apologize, I didn't know I needed a permit for an at-grade deck. I understand you can't even get a permit for 7-foot fence. Explored those things. So I accelerated all of our efforts. I invited Dennis and his team to my home. They actually ended up coming to my home, 4 departments. After telling me they'd never go to people's homes, they came, which was great. And I did everything I could within my power. I hired the best contractor architects in Glendale that have relationship with the city of Glendale to do what was necessary to get our project, which the deck was already finished in 2 days, but to get the project approved and within the standards of the codes of the city in Glendale. So again, I will recognize the fact that, yeah, I didn't have a permit when I constructed the deck. At-grade deck, my understanding was like a paver stone patio. I didn't need a permit, so I apologize. But with that said, we eventually did get the permit. But just 2 days, approximately 2 days after we got the permit, and by the way, I learned about us being ready to go get the permit at a restraining order hearing with my neighbor, where City of Glendale, Dennis Joe, testified against me. And I learned there that the RTI document was signed off on by all the departments, so that next morning I went and posted the fees for the permit. When I went into the City of Glendale permitting office, I found my account was on hold. I don't know what that was for. They eventually removed it off of hold. I posted the fees. I got the permit, and I was happy because now I could finally have friends over and things like that. And so next thing you know, I got the revocation letter on a matter that we had discussed with Miro, with Dennis, with the planning department, everybody. They signed off. I could show you the architectural drawings, how the 18 inches is not an issue. They gave us advisement based on the 18 inches would help with the line of sight for the neighbor, all of this stuff. We had extensive conversations about removing guardrails. We hired structural engineer to make sure that the retaining wall that we were gonna put would provide enough distance so that the guardrails would not be necessary. The guardrails being critical because it brings you over the 18 inches. To me, that's not a mistake when you have many, many conversations from many departments on the same topic. It's not just oversight or missed something. We talked about it with architects, engineers, And it was very common practice amongst the engineers that we saw and architects. It was not a problem. It was, the project was savable. So if I could take a moment of your time to show you a couple of the attachments, and bear with me, so I'm just learning of these exhibit numbers today, but I think I did enough work here, so I'm gonna try to do it in a way that doesn't take up too much of your time. I'd like to start with Exhibit 24, which is from the Forestry Department, Catherine Arborist. She had done many visits to my home because of the fallen tree, and she was okay with the location of the deck being far away from the oak trees. It was the only place. We were limited as to where we put it from that standpoint of the oak trees. There's, again, many oak trees. You'll see them in the architectural drawings of our home. It's the reason they call it the Verdugo Woodlands. Can I take you to Exhibit 23, if that's okay? If you scroll down, somewhere in this should be a discussion from the planning department regarding the 18-inch, and I apologize, it's a little small, but hopefully if you can read it, I mean, I could read it for you. It says, and this is Dennis Joe, senior planner, sending this email to me. I had further advised with lowering the deck 2 reasons. The zoning code allows at-grade decks that do not project more than 18 inches above the adjacent grade to be located within zone's 10-foot minimum interior setback. I could read the rest of it to you, but I mean, I think that's pretty sufficient there. And that was just one of many communications we had. And we went into much detail about what constitutes 18 inches. Does the part that's above 18 inches, does it disqualify the whole deck, or is it just a portion where the 18 inches is above? And all of that stuff I learned about. I had extensive conversations, and then on top of architects, engineers, and everything. So if I could take you to Exhibit 22, this is the document I learned of during a restraining order hearing with a neighbor where the city of Glendale happened to be there for some reason. Again, I don't know why they were involved in a civil matter. Civil matter is very common in our society, even with your neighbor. What's not common is to have a judge, attorney, neighbor harass and take the wind out of your life with 3 young kids and a bird's eye view into our property from all the different angles with his guest home and his rooftop decks and everything included. God forbid that we do any work within our yard. Meanwhile, 120 feet of concrete wall is well encroached into our property. We've tried to not escalate that with lawsuit. Meanwhile, I'm using college fund savings to pay for all of these different things, and I didn't, I think Mr. Miros might remember I asked him at the beginning, before we got all the architect's expenses involved and everything, I said, maybe it's better I just remove this. It seems like a lot of work, what you're talking about structurally, the engineering of the wall. And he said specifically to me, he said, Art, we don't want you to remove the deck. We want you to enjoy the view, and we want the neighbor to enjoy the view. I said, what does the neighbor have to do with it? But okay. So they told me not to remove it. None of the violation letters said remove it. It was, even Mr. Dennis Joe said, we could save this. When he first saw it, he walked onto the deck, it was already done, and he looked at the back of the deck for a very long time. I think he was trying to see if the fence that's immediately behind the deck, if it was attached to the deck, because again, that would disqualify the 18 inches. We had extensive conversations. It's definitely not a mistake. It's a result of my neighbor being a judge and the harassment and the privilege of that status to invoke decisions that normally wouldn't happen. That's my conclusion of what I see it to be, because to me it's very unusual. Just a couple days after I get the permit, that quickly you guys did a review. 18 months into this could have been reviewed, but right after I got the permit, just a couple days later it gets revoked. I was just completely miffed. So there's some more stuff I could show you that maybe would give you some comfort level, that we've done extensive amount of architectural work. The timing in which they sent the violation notices and stuff, it doesn't align with what they're saying about continued work. And in fact, there was multiple stop work order violation notices that were just bogus. There was no work. We were in a stop work order. In fact, I got a permit for a bathroom remodel. I was scared to even start it because I didn't know if someone was going to complain there was construction going on. So that's how crazy the neighbors were getting about calling the police and everything. So the moment I knew that there was a stop work order, there hasn't been any work. And the timing of their notices are very unusual. We had in-person meetings together at the property. 6 weeks later, I get a letter, but no work has been done from the time that they were at the property. So the timing of the letters and stuff, it's written in a way to appear that there's been ongoing work, as if we're just renegades just trying to blast through it, and it's definitely not the case. We're professionals. So this document here is all the sign-off from the different departments, including fire and engineering and planning. Could it be a mistake when it's put in writing as well? I don't know. I don't think so, because you have multiple departments looking at that. But then again, I don't work for the city. I'm just trying to get my project in line with everything that needs to, so we could get the sign off and move forward. The neighbor's narrative has been unpermitted work, gives them the right to look in and demand and micromanage and entitlements. I'm trying to accelerate that. One of the first things Dennis said, why are you in such a rush? Maybe he thought I was trying to sell the home or something, as I was trying to eagerly shore up the work. I said, no, honestly, we did a lot of work in the yard during the pandemic, and we just want to finish it so we could get closure, throw away all the materials that are left and be done, and make sure we're not on the city's radar. We don't want to be on the city's radar for any reason. And it's been a journey, I'll tell you, and there's been some really great points in working with the city of Glendale and the planning departments and the building and safety, a lot of great things that we saw, but we thought we put closure and we got the permit and everything was going to be great with the neighbor at that point, and then it's like back to the drawing board. So I come to you today for something that's beyond just the permit, for you to consider looking at separation of duties and not having decisions being made only out of the purview of one person or one department, having that separation of duties to offset any chances of errors or fraud or mistakes or whatever it is, personal agendas. I have photos on my surveillance of code compliance sneaking around in the neighbor's yard while I was in communication with him to show him the work. It's not a transparent process. It wasn't ethical, and it was clearly designed in a way to, how do you give a work stop violation notice if you haven't seen the work or you haven't seen the property? They just put it on my door twice. They used it in court against me. So I told the judge, I said, this isn't, what's the work? Nobody even knows what the work is. They don't even say. So to me, that non-transparency is a problem, and I ask for you today, beyond the scope of this permit, to consider having audits or reviews or regulations that oversee these kinds of things, that at least would address some of similarly situated matters with other residents as well, if they're happening. Exhibit 13, please, Joseph, thank you. This is one of the architectural drawings, and there was lots of back and forth, and I thank the planning department for the patience for us to get everything in line with their guidelines, and the scope of work was a deck. We put a fence there because they kept complaining about the chain link, and finally we just removed the chain link and refaced it with wood. I never really were able to complete it because he kept calling the police when we were working on the property line. And so we were excited with having a permit, we could formalize coming to a conclusion. This drawings, I show it to you today so that you understand that there was a sign off by the planning department on it, about 18 inches specifically, somewhere in those like little comments. So anywhere there's a signature, it's probably going to show Glendale fire prevention. Bottom, yeah, yeah, it's in the bottom, like middle. Do you see it? I don't see it. But anyways, my point is it's signed off in there and it talks about it there. It's part of the architectural plans. We were going to actually lower it to like, I think it was like 12 inches or something. But the building safety suggested not to because of, you get too close to the ground, the wood and the water and stuff like that. We had treated wood, but still. So there was, again, extensive conversations about it. How do you how do you call it a mistake? And why is it that an attorney supposedly is educating the city staff on the guidelines or the rules of the municipal code? And I've paid the fees, I've paid all the architecture fees, I've paid all of the city fees, and just a couple days later, sorry, it's not valid. That to me is not right. It's just something's wrong with the picture. Nobody talks about giving me my fees back, nothing. It's just, why did they wait till after I paid the fees to tell me that? Why not before? These are the things going on in my mind after extensive amount of architectural work, no physical work, but the architectural work, lots of drawings back and forth on something that was already done, but we're trying to get it in line with the code. So I don't want to continue to go over too much detail there about it. And then lastly, I'll take you to exhibit, permit issued on June 23rd. I could show it to you if just real quickly, exhibit 16.
Mr. Sukasian?
Yes.
Question. Before this exhibit, there was one exhibit, there's lots of signatures. That
Yes.
one approved by city employees, the city engineers.
Yes, all of them. This gentleman.
Okay.
Well,
Right.
actually, I take it back. Maybe somebody from his department.
Building department.
Yes, building and safety, fire, planning, maybe forestry, all of the different, I think there's 6 or 7 departments.
Excuse me, one second. Have you concluded your presentation yet?
No, I just have two things to show.
Just wait until
Okay.
then we'll ask the questions.
Okay, thank you. Just real quick, this permit I show you, just for the sake of the date, it's June 23rd, I could tell you. I don't know if you need to see it, but June 23rd was when we got the permit issued. After I posted the fees, permit issued. And then let me take you to Exhibit 9, which is the revocation letter. Is it normal business practice, just a couple days after receiving a permit, that you guys have an audit review of, is it randomized? In other words, how did I end up on the radar? 18 months leading up to this, everyone's reviewing it already. Why 2 days after I got the permit and my account was on hold, that nobody knew what it was on hold for? Why just 2 days later they're sitting around a boardroom talking about Art's property and how it was that he got a permit? What do you mean how it was? We submitted plans and drawings, everyone signed off. Why is this and it's on the most minuscule thing that it seems like, I just wish we would have been told that prior to all this work that was done in terms of the vendors that we had to hire to do it. And the date of this letter is June 30th. It's not even a week. So that's my conclusion to this. I'm apologetic for starting the work without the permit. It'll never happen again, I could tell you that. And going forward, I just want more transparency. Hopefully, some more oversight or separation of duties would help resolve some of those siloed events that are occurring within the city departments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I think the staff has,
Oh, yes.
board members have some questions.
Okay, after they stop you, city stop you or yourself? Like, for example, you start working without permit, and then anybody complain about this project, and city came and stop you.
basically, neighbor complains. I talked to the city as well. I invited them to my home. They came and looked at it. The work was already done. Like, it's just the at-grade deck, took 2 days, maybe 3 days actually. But I didn't get a work stop violation or work stop notice until at least 6 weeks later from the time they came to my home. And it's still not clear to me, what can I stop, what can I not stop? Is the fence part of the deck? Is it not? Error on the side of caution. Again, I'm not even doing a bathroom remodel, that the permit's gonna expire soon, because I'm worried, is that considered work, part of that project? To me, I would think it's not part of it, but they keep adding things that are not part of it too, it seems like. Like, how's the retaining wall part of the deck? Like, that's all the way in a different part of the yard, so.
After that, you hire architect, engineers, civil or structural, and they did their plan, and then city approve whatever. I noticed the signatures. Now, your plan, design review board, they check it?
It wasn't required by the design review board?
It's not required.
No.
Okay. Your neighbor is, you're saying judge. Okay, local judge or outside the city judge? Like,
he's an administrative law judge, and I think it's downtown. The gentleman's here himself today. He's just administrative law judge. I don't really know anything beyond that. I don't know. He's active judge, attorney.
and
Wife's attorney.
after you got the permit, how many days they stop your work?
After I got the permit?
Yes,
Well, you stop the work or revoke it?
revoke it,
7 days.
7 days.
So 18 months of work in terms of architectural, got stamps and everything, and then just a few days after, 7 days, got a letter by email saying, sorry, we were wrong,
From city.
from city, from this gentleman here.
During those 7 days, were there any construction going on?
No.
Nothing?
No, we
Okay.
haven't done construction since, we couldn't even do it. I mean, they kept calling the police and everything. It's like if for personal, like if you're walking the property line, it wouldn't be possible. But no, we haven't done any work.
So for example, the railings, they were already there before you got the permit?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah, we haven't added anything. We're waiting for the permit so we could formally do it correctly. And again, my goal was not to be on the city radar, to upset anybody, including the neighbors. You know, it's during COVID. The goal was to keep the kids off the iPads and keep them outside. And, you know, I kind of wish it was going to turn into, knew if it was going to turn into this, would have never gotten involved. There's a lot of headache.
So is it my understanding that the only thing that's revoking it is because of the 10-foot setback? Is that?
That's my understanding.
Members of the board, if I could introduce myself, my name is Yvette Nuki, and I'm with the City Attorney's Office. Since we were involved in the decision, I'd like to take that question. Yes, so the only reason the building permit was revoked was not anything to do with structural issues or engineering or anything like that. It was simply because the zoning code prohibits certain things most things from being in the 10-foot setback. There are exceptions, but this particular structure, the deck, did not fall within any of those exceptions, and the code makes no exceptions whatsoever for the structure. So the only option for the applicant would be to apply for and get a variance in order to keep the deck there. Previously, the planning department had interpreted the code to allow such decks in the setback, but upon further examination from our office, we advised the planning department division that they can we cannot support that interpretation, that it's not supported by the text of the code. And so therefore, they have discontinued that practice of allowing 18-inch decks in the setback and any structures that aren't specifically called out as an exception to that setback rule. So I hope that answers, I'm sorry if it was a little long-winded, but I hope that answered the question.
So the reality of it is, if plaintiff moves the deck with the 10-foot setback, everything should be okay? Is that?
I'm hesitant to answer that question. I believe so, but I'll let Mr. Joe take that question.
The limitation would be, if you don't mind, it would be the oak trees. Sure.
Mr. Chair and members of the board, so if they were to review, or if the homeowner or the property owner were to move the deck, staff would have to reevaluate the project because of the steep incline. As you move the deck further away from the property line, it will further project above grade, so therefore it wouldn't just be, I hate to use the word 18 inches, and that's what the problem here, even though we couldn't allow that. It would be more than 18 inches. I mean, if he had to make it at grade, he would have to further excavate from the grade of the hillside and dig that thing in there and nestle it into the hillside, which we're not encouraging either. I'm just talking about his options here. So to answer your question, and I hate to be long-winded as well, we will take a look at it. You know what I mean? It could potentially require design review. I mean, we do require decks that are greater than 8 feet to be automatically reviewed by the design review board. So, thank you.
So the distinction with what the city attorney says and things like that is when a judge tells you that I'll make sure that you can't enjoy that deck, and just a few days later, I get a revocation letter from a gentleman that's telling me a year and a half ago, we don't want you to remove the deck, effectively telling me remove the deck. Something's not right with that picture and should be investigated. And that's what I conclude with. It can't be a coincidence.
I have a few questions. Mr. Sukazian, I've personally dealt with architects on projects here and there, and sometimes I have ideas and they say, oh no, you can't, there's this code, there's that code, there's zoning, there's building, there's planning, everyone, and then you have to kind of put those all together. Were you unaware, or had your engineers and architects, none of them advised you about this possible issue with a 10-foot setback?
No, it was common accepted practice of the 18 inches rule. I learned it first from the contractors. So this is not like a wild anomaly. It is like that's why they signed off on it. It was a standard thing. You're allowed to go into the setback area just like a fence. You're allowed to go into the setback area as long as it's less than 18 inches from the ground. Now, the question I have is his retaining wall is more than 3 feet tall, or approximately 3 feet tall, and it's in the setback area. It's beyond the setback area. It's encroaching my yard. And the city's been great about making sure that they differentiate between what's a civil matter and what's within their purview. This is the exact same thing. Permits issued, his permit's issued. My permit's revoked, his permit's not revoked. He's a judge, I'm not a judge. That's the story I want to try to get across, is this decision, and the reason the city attorney is here is because of the judge. It has nothing to do with me. Who is Art? I shouldn't be on the city of Glendale's radar. I'm a single family, I got 3 kids, middle class working adults. I mean, what reason is there for there to be a drone over my property from 9 p.m. to 2 p.m. every night? What reason is there for planning department to say, I never go to people's properties when I suggest that he comes out and looks at it, because I'm not familiar with the business. And a week later he says, hey, can we come out? And they're all there taking pictures and stuff. What prompted that intense scrutiny of this project? And it's because the judge called around to all the neighbors. My neighbors confessed to me that said that he called to try to encourage teaming up on me. They all know he's a judge. It's misconduct. He's going to be held accountable for that. I think he should be held accountable.
Mr. Sukazian, with all due respect, we're not here to make a decision on the civil case that you have with your neighbor.
Correct.
So let's put that aside for a while. Let's just get to the context of this, the deck issue, the wall issue, or whatever the case is. Okay, so with that, if you have concluded, I would like to know if there is any comments from public and from the neighbors, especially.
We have one individual that like to speak. We have Thomas Keller.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Sukazian.
Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon. I'm Thomas Heller, the neighbor to the south of 1470 Villain Drive. I live in the neighboring house with my family. I support the decision of the building official to revoke the permit. It's the correct decision. I refer the board to the letter from my and my wife's attorney, Exhibit 3. Proposed deck, which is just a slightly lowered version of the existing deck that Mr. Sukazian built without a permit, is not allowed in the interior setback for the reasons stated in that letter. The building official made that determination. The city attorney's office concurred. That is the correct determination based on the plain language of the setback provision in the municipal code. The board does not have the authority to waive the requirements of that provision on this appeal, nor should it do so. This deck has no business being right next to our house in the interior setback. The photographs attached to Exhibit 3, the attorney's letter at pages 18 and 19, show how close it is to our house. Mr. Sukazian built it without a permit in the worst possible location for us. It's right next to our teenage daughter's bedroom and bathroom. A person standing on it can look down into her bedroom and bathroom windows. It's been there for over a year and a half now. It's a mistake of Mr. Sukazian's own making because he built it without applying for a permit beforehand. The after-the-fact permit that is the subject of this appeal would have allowed him to leave it where it is in violation of the setback provision. Therefore, it was properly revoked. Mr. Sukazian's made a lot of accusations against me that I've committed all sorts of misconduct and ethical violations. Those are false, unfounded, and quite frankly, outrageous. None of that is true. The accusations are complete fabrications. Mr. Sukazian just made them up. He hasn't presented a shred of supporting evidence because there is none. Mr. Sukazian does not feel constrained by the truth and has no compunction about lying to city officials to try to get what he wants. That's very troubling and reprehensible, and his claims of disparate treatment by the city are baseless. This board should sustain the building official's decision and deny Mr. Sukazian's appeal. Thank you.
We have one more public speaker. I can have Angel Guzman. Oh, Gomez. Sorry about that.
Gomez.
Angel Gomez.
Yes. Board members, my name is Angel Gomez. I own 1460 Villain Drive, which is one of two properties neighboring the appellant's residence. The second property belongs to the Heller family. I'm here to respond to false statements made about me, made by the appellant in his appeal letter, and to request that this board sustain the building official's decision to revoke permit number BB 2116642. Simply put, the permit was correctly revoked for not being in compliance with the zoning order. The appellant's contention that Mr. Heller's status as a judge played any role in the permit's revocation is false and without merit or proof. Unfortunately, the appellant has a long history of making false statements. In his appeal letter, he states that I supported him until I fell prey to pressure from Mr. Heller to switch sides. Nothing could be further from the truth. Both my family and the Heller family have endured more than a year and a half of absolutely reprehensible behavior from the appellant, which is directly associated with this project. His building has been materially detrimental to our welfare. In addition, Mr. Heller and I have both been victims of the appellant's outright fabrications. I've had to go to civil court because of the appellant's false accusations, where the judge said the following of Mr. Sukazian, and I quote, "And I don't find the petitioner particularly credible. He's evasive, and he's just trying to tell us his own story over whatever anybody else is trying to get out of him, and by way of answers. I have the official court transcript right here to prove it." I would also like to correct the record by stating the civil court judge did not summarize that the appellant adhered to all steps and guidance provided by the city with complete compliance, as he misrepresents in his appeal letter again. In addition, the appellant is trying to spin that senior planner Dennis Cho's appearance at civil court was somehow improper. Dennis was compelled to come under subpoena, and I imagine that he did not want to be there. In closing, the appellant's accusations have absolutely no basis in fact. He is not receiving disparate treatment, and his permit was correctly revoked for not being in compliance with the zoning order. I respectfully ask that this decision be sustained. Thank you for your time.
No other comments. It will be turned over to staff for any further questions, and then to you, Mr. Sukiazian, for any follow-up after that.
Now you may ask questions from the staff.
As Mr. Rodarte has stated, I'm available for any questions. So I know we heard a lot this afternoon, and I'm available for any clarification.
I have a question. Mr. Sukazian mentioned when I asked him if his architect or engineer had mentioned this minimum setback of 10 feet, he said that and it was a matter of almost kind of casual courtesy that you could do anything up to 18 inches. Can you elaborate on that, if that is general practice that's done and not scrutinized, and what staff is doing to maybe address that going forward or looking back at its records?
So I know he had posted our emails on there, which is true. You know, the staff had in the past had incorrectly allowed in the past for decks of 18 inches, and the thought behind that was 18-inch planter walls are allowed in the street front setback, and you know we were saying it's so minuscule. What's the difference if someone put a planter wall or something like that on the side? You know, we felt at the time that it wasn't, it wasn't a big deal, but incorrectly once again. Our code is exclusionary when it states as nothing should be constructed or placed or located of any building or structure within the required setback of 10 feet, and there is a itemized list which explicitly has specific items, and decks are not within those areas, and the plan division has, I guess in the past, has been incorrectly been interpreting it that 18-inch, like for example, of a planter wall being in the setback, and particularly it states that in the street front setback. So that email, I think it is dated in 2021. So it's correct. I mean, he's stating something that's true, and I've stated that in my presentation that I had ill-advised that, and even that's even the reason why staff had approved it, and then once again, a letter of objection from a law firm had questioned staff, which we had to reevaluate, and we had to get an opinion, formulate opinion. It was concurred by our city attorney, which they concurred that the Glendale Municipal Code was improperly implemented.
So follow-up questions to that. Going forward, has the staff been advised and informed on the proper interpretation of the code? And then going backwards, if all of a sudden you have a floodgate of multiple people coming to the city and saying, hey, my neighbor messed up on this too, how does the city intend to deal with that?
So this is if it was implemented and permitted, we can't go back and make folks go out there. I mean, it's not like this is it's not like decks are a common thing as water heaters and window permits or anything like that. It's very uncommon. If someone were to come back, we can't tell them to remove it, but in this opportunity, or in this specific case, it was being contested. So we had to re-review it.
If I could add to that, board members, so going forward, the planning department has been advised by our office that setback, and not just setback regulations in the zoning code, but all regulations have to be examined textually, and exceptions cannot be read in that are not there. If exceptions are desired to be put in, they have to go to city council to formally, planning commission, then city council to formally adopt a zoning code amendment. And just to shed a little bit of light on our analysis, we really took a close look at the zoning code and tried to see if there was a way to interpret the code so that this deck could be incorporated into the language of one of these exceptions. And there was no way to do it really, in our opinion. There was absolutely no textual support for it, and that's why we gave our opinion, because we typically try to support the interpretation of the planning division, and they're not often very, very wrong. So this is a very rare example of something that's just been applied incorrectly for a while, and we needed to reverse course, and course has been reversed. And I don't think that there are other areas of the code, hopefully, that have such a incorrect interpretation. And it is unfortunate, but it does happen. But that does not mean that we can allow the permit to remain out there with this in violation of the code.
Understood. And if this applicant, assuming the permit revocation holds, and this applicant applies for a variance, that's one avenue, whether or not that pans out. If it does not, is the alternative pretty much that he would have to remove the entire deck?
Mr. Chair, members of the board, the applicant can approach this any way they would like that has to comply with code, whether it's a partial reconstruction. If he were to somehow set it back and push it further away, that's fine. I mean, I'm never going to tell people what to do. I can't. That's not within my authority. I can only tell him what the code states. You know, if he comes up with a solution and it actually does comply with codes, we will absolutely approve it. So I don't want to say that we would. That's the only answer. You have to remove it. I can't say that.
Understood. Thank you.
Going forward, if we're revoking permits, is it standard practice to give the customer back their money?
I believe so. I'll let Mr. Lotsky answer that, the building official, but I believe so.
I'd like to turn this over to our administrator, Joseph Rodardi.
It depends. From my understanding, this is a permit that's been already through plan check and also through permits. So the typical process would be that you'd be able to refund anything that has not incurred city staff time. So if plan check, if he's applying for a refund for plan check, those fees have already been reviewed on the plans and everything else. The permit fee, if no inspections have incurred, then the permit fees would be refunded. He would just need to apply for those.
But my understanding is that it's an error on the city's part.
I believe we could definitely, if that's the board's direction, we could definitely work something out where Mr. Sukiazian could get the vast majority of his money back, but I cannot make guarantees if the code does not allow us to refund that money, but we'll do everything in our power to refund as much or close to 100% as we can.
May I ask that we go back to that specific code section that talks about the encroachments in the side yard setback, please?
If you can pull up my slide, and I can, Mr. Chair, we were speaking about the zoning code, or, okay.
Yes.
And once again, I believe this is exhibit number 7, but, and this is table 3011B of our zoning code, and I simplified it, okay? It was just to demonstrate where exactly it is, because if with all of the other lot coverage, landscaping, front setback, et cetera, it gets a little bit busy. And the reason why I modified this is just to explain where specifically it states for setbacks in the interior under the R1R zone. It states for any new buildings or structures, it just has to be set back 10 feet. So I apologize, it is amended as I stated, and the full chart has been attached to the packet available on the web, as well as your packet that was sent to you prior to this meeting.
Okay, and can we please take a look at that section again that talks about the 18-inch deck?
Members of the board, this section does not have the exceptions. This only says that nothing can be built in the setback. There's a different section that has the exceptions, and that is not on this slide. And we can definitely pull it up online, potentially.
Yes, I can pull it up on, excuse me, I can pull it up on
I
the
thought
computer.
we just saw that a few minutes ago.
I think it's this one.
This is 18 inches.
No, that was an email. Was it the section 30.11070 for setback exceptions? There's a link to it on one of the exhibits, on Exhibit 7, but it's not, the exceptions I don't see listed.
Well, that section that applied that nothing more than 18 inches, if it's not more than 18 inches, may be constructed. I'm referring to
There
that
is
section.
no section that says that. There's just a series of exceptions, and none of them mention 18 inches.
So what is permitted in interior setback?
Mr. Chair, I'm about to pull it up on the screen, so just if you
Okay.
allow me, just maybe a couple more seconds
Please,
here.
thank
And
you.
I gladly show up this section here. This one? Okay, so we can pull that on the screen, but this is, I just want to start here and just state that this is the setback requirement and exceptions, and then we got to scroll down to.
Sure, just tell me as you want me to scroll.
So if you bring that over.
I saw it in the Dennis Joe's email.
Mr. Chair, thank you for your time. So 3011-070, it's just talking about setback requirements and exceptions. Subsection A is about street front setbacks, and if I can ask Mr. Rodarte to scroll down, and then we're gonna go to, I think that might be either B or C. So continue to please scroll down, keep on going, please. That's, keep on going. And please stop. Maybe scroll so that C is at the very top. So right there is perfect. This is now, once again, talking about setbacks and exceptions within the setback. So what it says is no person shall construct, locate, maintain within the space between the property line or interior setback line or any building, wall, fence, or any other improvement or structure except, and it just talks about, and it goes through, and it talks about boundary fence, which is not a deck. It talks about like a wall. B is talking about E projections off a building. So if a building were to comply with setback, it had an 18-inch. Well, those eaves, no more than 30 inches, can project into that setback. C is footings for public utility vaults. D are fireplaces. E are utility meters. And then if you can go down to the next one. Now, as you recall from my presentation, this property is located in the R1R. So these are additional exceptions within the R1R zone. And it just basically lists them off and says, well, what else is permitted in the R1R zone? And this is where, in the R1R zone, it allows retaining walls. And Mr. Sukazian's project does involve a retaining wall. And that's not the question involved here. It's really about the deck. We're saying you can have a fence in the setback. You can have that retaining wall in the setback. Really, what we're talking about, what was revoked, and as you read the letter, it says partially revoked, and it's specifically talking about the deck only. So per this code section here, it's saying that the retaining wall can be there. It did say that fences and walls can be in the setback. So we're fine with those. Under subsection 2B, once again about retaining walls, C is detached garages, and I'm gonna keep on going, driveways, mechanical equipment, railings, swimming pools, H, sorry, I lost it. I think you went a little bit too far. Mr. Rodarte, if you can scroll up. In a case of subdivision, this is not in case of a subdivision. We're not subdividing property. I is talking about uncovered steps, ramps, landings, which is as high as 4 feet. And this is not an uncovered step, a ramp, or a landing. And J is porte cocheres. And that ends right there. So once again, upon a reanalysis of this is, once again, we have an exclusionary code that says no building structure can be located in the setback, and then there are very strict exceptions, which had to be reevaluated, which the planning department or the community development department, with concurrence with the city attorney's office, they reviewed this exact same sections that we just reviewed this afternoon, and just said, was this implemented correctly or not? As a result, and I hate to reiterate this, and my own fault, it was not implemented correctly.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm referring to the exhibit number 17. If you could please put it up. This may be what Mr. Sukazian claims, but I want to know where this came from. The very last paragraph. on the exhibit number 17. And the first line.
If I can ask for clarification, which one are you pointing out to?
I'm sorry, that's a different exhibit. I'm referring to this exhibit.
I believe it's his email. Is it the text of
Oh,
the email?
attachment 1. Down below says attachment 1.
It could be Exhibit 23
There it
as
is,
well.
attachment 1, right there. Could you please elaborate on that circled 18 inches, and can we read that, please, to see what it says? And is that true or not?
Okay, so this is, I'm going to read verbatim off the
Yes,
slide
please,
here, okay?
please.
So I think Mr. Chair is referencing, it said, this is an email from myself, and I believe it's to the applicant. I had further advised with lowering the deck for 2 reasons. The zoning code allows at-grade decks that do not project more than 18 inches above the adjacent grade and to be located within the 10-foot minimum interior setback. So this is when I was ill-advising. And this is not text of the code.
Understood. That was your interpretation of the code.
Correct, before I was corrected.
And may I ask you that, up until now that we have interpreted the code, not you personally, the city has interpreted the code like this. How many cases do you think it's been out there that people have built a deck up to 18 inches within their interior setback? Can you just guess?
I mean, it might pop up maybe once. It's not like I see every permit in the city, but it's very infrequent. I mean, usually they're not in the hillsides, but it's
Okay.
very infrequent. I mean, I can't recall, I mean, this is an
But it's
arbitrary
possible
number.
that there are decks that are up to 18 inches within the interior setbacks of other properties, right?
Yeah, I mean.
Because this code has been around for so long, and the staff has interpreted
Correct.
that up to 18 inches is not
Yeah.
an issue.
Yeah, I mean, it would be several. It's not like it's more than,
Right.
it's very infrequent.
And if I may ask the building official, is the building permit required for a deck up to 18 inches above ground? Yes, absolutely. No, I'm just trying to put this whole thing into context.
Sure.
We have a zoning code for so many years. I don't think this section has ever changed. The staff has interpreted this section for so many years for other properties. Some people did pull a permit because they were advised to. Some people probably did not pull a permit because it wasn't required by building code, I'm assuming. And now we have a situation, I totally understand, an applicant has started the construction without permit. We all know that. The construction was finished within a few weeks apparently, but then again, the violation was issued to stop the construction apparently right after it was constructed without permit, more or less. And then the violation told the applicant to go and prepare plans and come and get a permit. So it took the applicant, I don't know why, 18 months to prepare plans for a deck and a fence, to go to the building department and apply for a permit. And we can blame it on the pandemic. This was during 2021. So at that time, the staff, whether it was the building department or the planning or both, they looked at the scenario again. They already familiar with the project. They had advised the applicant to legalize their illegal work. And even at that point, still, it wasn't clear whether 18-inch deck was permitted or not permitted, and I'm assuming it was permitted. That was the interpretation, and that was a building permit was issued to legalize the deck. Am I correct so far understanding this scenario?
So far, I think you're correct, yes.
So immediately after the permit is issued, a week later, something happens, something triggers. And then we go back and say, okay, we made the wrong interpretation about this particular section, and we'd like to revoke your permit.
May I fill in the
Please.
something happened?
I'm waiting for any comments, any answers.
Yes.
I didn't hear a question. So your question, would be.
It's not a question yet.
What happened?
Okay.
Well, what happened was I can be very transparent. I'm not hiding anything. We got a letter from Mr. Heller's attorney. I don't know if it was Mr. Heller's attorney or Mr. Gomez's attorney. Regardless, we got a letter from a law office pointing out this issue of interpretation of the zoning code. Normally, the city attorney's office, we don't get involved in permit issuance. However, because it was a letter from an attorney, from a law firm, the planning division forwarded to us, and then we looked at it, and we had internal meetings, and we discussed it, and we determined that what was being pointed out to us by this law firm was correct. And so we advised the planning division, which led to the revocation. The reason it was revoked within a week of being issued is because we wanted to let the applicant know as soon as possible what our decision was, so that they would not, take steps in reliance upon the permit. We wanted to mitigate any expenses that the applicant might take on as a result of the incorrect issuance of the permit.
So at the time when the decision was made to revoke the permit, were there any inspections conducted by the city?
I don't believe so, because the conditions had not changed since the construction.
Please.
Can I ask to clarify that question? Are you asking, were there any inspections after the permit was issued or before the permit was?
Actually, both.
So after the permit was issued, there were no inspections conducted. Prior to the issuance of the permit, because there was a neighborhood services case called on, it is Neighborhood Services Division's obligation to go out and conduct an inspection to do an investigation of the situation.
Right, for the purpose of the violation, but not necessarily to approve or disapprove the construction that's been going on, or underway or finished, I don't know.
Correct. Any inspections by Neighborhood Services or Building and Safety to investigate is not a
permit related duty.
Is not a mechanism to approve or disprove a condition in the field.
Right.
And clarification, planning staff and building and safety staff went out to the site. This is during the height of the pandemic, when no offices were open. Mr. Sakazian had asked, well, how do I get advisement? I don't know what I'm to do. He didn't have his architects, engineers, he just did the work. And in the sake of good customer service, we went out there just to give an idea so that he can, whether to proceed on hiring an engineer, an architect, if this is what we wanted to do. We were just kind of telling him this is what we require. So as you heard Mr. Sakazian state, that building and safety staff and planning staff usually state that we don't go to sites, but all of a sudden we did. Well, yes, we did. We don't usually go out there in these illegal constructions, but in the sake of good customer service, and no city services where you can come in and visit and speak to a counter was available at the time. So we try to be helpful all the time.
Right, understood. So is there any indication whether a building permit is required for an 18-inch deck?
I'll be happy to clarify that now. And I'd like to describe the scope of work as a combination of retaining wall, fence, and deck. So specifically, if it were only a deck, then it is exempt from permits up to 30 inches in height. If it's a retaining wall over 4 feet, measured from the bottom of the footing, it would be exempt unless there's surcharges or unless there's grading conditions because this is on a hillside. And then a fence, if that fence is less than 7 feet, then it would be exempt from a permit. So I'd like to also clarify what would probably be the next question is, any work done, even though a permit is not necessarily required to be issued for certain types of work, for any work to be done, let's see. Exemptions from permit requirements of this code shall not be deemed to grant authorization of any work to be done in any manner in violation of the provisions of this code or any other laws or ordinances of this jurisdiction. So what that means is it becomes the onus of the owner to investigate, to make sure that whatever work they are doing, they're not in violation. We always welcome customers to come and ask as many questions in that sense, and we would give them the requirements so that they can better make that decision. However, a permit was required based on the retaining wall and the fence, and therefore the deck being part of all of that was also part of the permit. And I hope that clarifies.
It certainly does. Thank you very much, Chair. So the retaining wall was required for them to be able to build their deck. The deck wasn't just, I don't have good understanding of the plans, but I could barely read, I thought I saw on the plans that there was an upper pad available on this property, some few feet above the level pad of the building, and showed some steps that goes up to that level pad. Was that level pad already existing, or that's something that the applicant created up there?
There was retaining walls in place that showed that there was earthwork done to retain that earthwork, for which then the deck was placed on top of that.
Okay. So clearly the deck was part of the retaining wall construction. Okay. You had to construct the retaining wall before the deck can be put up there. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Board members have any questions?
So if that's the case, from this picture with the wood, this is the retaining wall that was just built, or that was existing?
The existing retaining wall were in fact rail ties. I know it can be kind of confusing. You may reference other photographs, so you'll see retaining walls as rail ties, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Building Official, a deck above that retaining wall constructive rail ties would not be permitted, and one of the reasons triggering, in order to have that type of surcharge or whatever it is, and this is his field of expertise, it would have to be a concrete retaining wall.
That is correct. The Glendale Building and Safety Code does not allow wood retaining walls.
Would it be permitted to pave that level pad up there to make it look like a deck? Pavers, concrete, whatever, on grade?
Flat work is,
Flat work?
it's technically a flat work. I mean, barred landscaping, tree protection for protected species, but
Landscaping, I understand, that's exempt, that's not construction. But I'm just trying to understand, what is the definition of a structure or a building? And I don't know if there's a clear definition in the code about structure or a building. Because if a deck is only up to 18 inches, is that considered a structure? Is 4-inch paving on grade, slab on grade, is that a structure? Or that's not a structure? Is there a clear definition in the code that says what a building or a structure is?
our zoning code does define structures and buildings.
Okay, I would like to see that, please.
In the meantime, I'd like to add to Mr. Joe's response. Can he just go ahead and put paving there? If this was absolutely flat land, then maybe it'd be a little bit easier to say yes. But because this is a hillside, and in order to put paving, he may wish to do additional features in order to accommodate that. I would like to caution, I'd like to be cautious and advise caution to show us what it is that the owner would intend and like to do, so that we can advise him in advance, is he in violations of any codes or not?
Absolutely, that would be the proper thing to do.
Thank you for the moment and pause there, Mr. Chair. So on the screen here we have shared is the zoning code for definition of building. Means anything constructed to have a roof supported by columns or walls for the purpose of housing or shelter or enclosure. This is not a building.
It's not a building.
It's not
Is
a
there a
building.
definition for structure?
Yes, we do. Mr. Rodardi, if you go ahead and scroll to that. Structure means anything constructed for which a permit is required and has a foundation but no roof. Structure does not include a fence or wall.
That's very clear, okay? So clearly this deck is a structure because it did a foundation. Because I understand that deck could not be built without the retaining wall constructed to create that level pad to put the deck on it. Okay, thank you very much. The reason for my questioning is not scrutinizing or anything, or I'm not questioning anybody's capability or whatnot. I just want to make sure that our board members are clear, understand, have a clear conscience and understanding of the case. Because we were given just this half an hour opportunity for a very complicated case that's been going on for over 1.5 years to make a decision on. Thank you.
I would like to add the definition, according to the building code, what a structure is. I'm not sure how helpful this would be, but I will quote. Structure, that which is built or constructed. I'm sorry, the code isn't more.
Maybe that does need clarification in the future.
But I'd like to respond in case.
Thank you. Please.
So am I safe to say that a simple solution might be that cut off the 10-foot back part of the deck? So you got your 10-foot setback, but now the wood and the trussing that was set
Commissioner,
in
if
the
you would,
back-
if I may interrupt, your mic?
So sorry. Is it safe to say that a quick solution would be the 10-foot setback? That's a given right now. So if you just cut off the deck 10 foot with the 10-foot setback, now the wood trussing that's behind it, is that part? If that's part of the retaining wall, then that would have to be taken down, right?
If you reduce the deck to have a 10-foot setback, I mean, it's almost whittled down to maybe, it wouldn't be that wide. I'm trying to look at the dimension here. From my understanding, the retaining wall, in order to put an additional wooden deck onto this grade, it's providing a surcharge onto the grade below it. But since the building code does not allow rail-tied wooden retaining walls, that's why it was important to have that new concrete retaining wall supporting it. So, I mean, are they physically attached? No. Is the deck have a foundation onto the grade that's supported by the retaining wall? Yes. But if they were to push that deck away, I mean, and just theoretically cut it, it wouldn't be much of a deck. But I think that's one of the things that I would say it's pretty safe to assume that Mr. Sakazian probably didn't take that option. I can't speak for that, but that's for him to answer.
Is the flip side to that is then just put pavers right behind it, and you still have your same dimension as the footprint, except you have pavers toward the back. Is that something that's permissible, or is that a solution? Just to give the plaintiff an out at this point, because right now the reality of it is, this is pretty clear and dry that it's 10-foot setback is a minimum.
Potentially if Mr. Sakazian were to put DG, decomposed granite, where he can walk on or whatever, it's required permit. I mean, like as staff had advised, we can only give him his options. I mean, we've gone through these things. We cannot tell him what to do, but he chose his decision.
Right, absolutely.
I have a question. After all corrections by city, applicant willing to do that?
May I ask for clarification for corrections?
Any correction with like 18-inch foundation or whatever, he does the wrong one, if applicant willing to do that?
Well,
then-
after many rounds, he was able to get a permit issued. So yes, he did, after many rounds, did comply. And once again, what the issue here is that the permit was issued in error.
Thank you.
Well, we're saying the permit was issued in error because the interpretation of that structure, deck, whatever, was changed, for lack of a better word. Because up until now, that interpretation was, it was interpreted differently. So looking at the drawing, to answer Stephen's concern, whether it can be cut back to 10 feet, it seems to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, this deck, it's only about 13 feet wide by about maybe 20 foot long, or those are the dimensions of this deck. 13 feet towards the property line, that means starting from PL. So that upper pad is probably about 15, 16 foot wide, according to this drawing, and the deck, it's only about 13 feet. So would that be a possibility if they, let's say, they lowered the deck, they cut off the footing and just lay the deck on grade, just like a paving, just like a slab on grade?
I don't, and this is more of a building question, I would rely on our building folks here. Laying the deck on the grade may have some waterproofing issues, but it goes to Board Member Lee's comment about if he were to lay flat work or pavers, or I gave the example of DG, I mean,
Right.
it doesn't require a permit.
Okay, so there are other options available. Are there any other questions from the board members?
No.
Chair Kashishian, I might add that if there's no further questions for staff, that we have.
That's why I was asking if there's any further questions from the staff, or, okay, thank you very much.
If I may have the appellant, Mr. Sukiyasin, come up.
I'd like to, thank you, Mr. Chair and board members, clarify a lot of those questions that we have. I have my architect here today. To clarify, the retaining wall has nothing to do with the supporting the deck at all. There's no surcharge. It has to do with giving enough distance so that we don't have to have guardrails. Because when you have the guardrails, even though actually technically that portion of the deck is outside of the 10-foot setback, when it wraps around, that guardrail then disqualifies the deck because of the 18-inch rule. So the retaining wall's purpose is so that if someone falls off the deck, there's enough distance that they don't roll off the hill or whatever. So it's just for that. It's nothing to do with supporting. And in fact, these are all existing retaining wall, and they're not retaining walls, they're rail tie planter boxes. They're gardening planters or whatever you call them. They're not holding anything. And we had a couple different engineers confirm that there was no surcharge to even that existing retaining wall. I asked the same questions of Mr. Joe regarding, because it was very complicated when they came to my home. I wasn't under the ability to go through all of this structural and all of this stuff, and I said, maybe I should just remove this. And I asked the same question about paver stones, because I was looking for alternative. Like, if this isn't here, can I put something else here? And I was told that paver stones is heavier than the deck, and so you're gonna have structural issues even more. You still have to have the wall. You still have to go through the whole thing. I was encouraged not to remove the deck. I would like to make a clarification that this is not a mistake. It's an interpretation that was commonplace prior to a certain date. Nothing changed in the code at all. The thing that changed was the judge sent a demand to the city attorney. And again, because he's a judge, these things are happening. Similarly situated matters, they're not being asked to be removed. Similarly, his wall that's encroaching my property is above 18 inches. It's above 30 inches. How come we're not asking him today to remove that wall? If I remove the deck, he removes the wall? Similarly situated, exact neighbors, preferential treatment. there's a legal responsibility amongst the city to be able to provide fair and equitable interpretation. Interpretation, not mistake, is a distinction. Retaining wall, not supporting the deck, is a distinction. I thank you for your patience. One more clarification to make. When Mr. Joe was in court to testify under Mr. Gomez's hearing that you heard of, restraining order hearing, which was a knee-jerk reaction to my hearing where he stole cameras off my property and stuff. After the judge heard Dennis Joe's testimony, which supported the great work that we did, he said that he's adhered to all of the guidelines and rules of the city. When the judge heard that, even though that's not a violence hearing, they were trying to make a case to say that all the construction is creating harm or nuisance to them. The judge didn't even need me to defend myself. We didn't have to defend. They saw that it was just clearly a nuisance. And that was under oath by Dennis Joe, senior planner of City of Glendale, under oath at a civil hearing, whether subpoenaed or not, stated that we have done everything and we got all the sign-offs and we've done everything to adhere to the Glendale City Code. And the judge reiterated that and he dismissed the case. I didn't even have to defend myself. That's significant because what that means is that, yeah, we started without the permit and it seems like that you don't even need a permit for 18 inches, my understanding now that I hear less than 30 inch, which is news to me. But that was my understanding to begin with, which is why I started to work without the permit. The fence, same thing. The gentleman here that testified saying next to his daughter's bedroom window, why is it that he's demanding we remove the fence if he wants privacy? We put the privacy up to create privacy for their sake as well. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say remove the fence and then I want privacy. So we're trying to do everything we can within our power. The problem that this emboldens the neighbors to continue to micromanage, demand, call police, utilize city resources to the nth degree because there is no formal approval. So it continues to nurture that narrative, unfortunately, and we're just trying to find closure. My architect's here today. You could ask all sorts of questions, detail about, he will answer the questions for you. If you need.
In looking at all the pictures of the deck, looking right below it, that 18 inches, I don't see a problem putting pavers down there. Structurally wise, architect, do you have any comments on that? Because right now, architecturally, you have railroad ties that are shoring up. You got about 3-4 layers of it. Right below, and adding pavers to it, to my knowledge, being in construction field, I don't think that's going to be that much of a load that it's going to collapse the hillside. So I see that as the simplest fix right now, because the reality of it is that 10-foot setback, it's a rule that's been in there for a long time. You can't go around it at this point. Just because there was a mistake made, the rule is the rule.
It's interpretation, not a mistake. The reason they don't talk about decks and the exceptions is nobody creates a deck that's low to the ground. Normally a deck is, 2-story, 10-foot high or 8-foot high or whatever. Normally, on average, decks are not built that low to the ground. The reason we did that is for the line of sight, for the respect to the neighbor, and also because we're on the top of the hillside, even though his home is above ours even, well above ours, that's enough view for us. We don't want to create any more height. But I think that is not a mistake, because if it was a mistake, why were there so many signatures everywhere? I think interpretation changed when the city attorney recommended, subsequent to receiving a demand notice from a judge, that now we better get serious about this. What about every other similarly situated home in the city of Glendale? And this is why the city council will be reviewing this matter. If we're not able to conclude it today, they're already involved. The city manager is assigned, the city attorney and everything, because the way I see it is this harassment has to stop. And it's not from the city. Don't get me wrong, this harassment is not from the city. The neighbors are emboldened by the narrative of, you see, the construction's illegal, it's ongoing, it never ends. It never ends because we put a stop to it. we can't finish it. It's on hold until we get a permit. So we've adhered to all the regulations, just as Mr. Dennis Joe said in court under oath. Can't refute that.
Well, Mr. Question, the fact of the matter is, even though the permit was issued and then revoked a week later, if during that process an inspection was conducted and signed off and approved, you're absolutely right. Then there was no reversal. We don't go, back to people who have done construction in the past and tell them, go ahead, now you have to comply with new code.
Sure.
But the fact is the permit was issued, and of course the permit can be revoked when it's issued. We just read
Sure.
all those to you. And that's what this, the interpretation was within that week. Whatever happened, we don't know. But, the interpretation was changed, and they found that the permit was issued in error, and that's why it was revoked. And you also mentioned about the deck issue, whatnot. We already cleared that. I asked extensive questioning from the staff to clarify this. This deck is not just a deck on grade. It's not like you come out of your house in the backyard and you put a layout an 18-inch deck. That's quite different than this. Definitely you have retaining walls built here. In fact, it's stepping up about, some 10 feet above the hill, above that upper pad. So all those retaining walls are necessary, and there's an required access for you from the lower pad to the upper pad. So the entire thing, it's one structure, one project. It's not just a deck. And thirdly, as we talked about, there are other options. And you can, if I were you, I would not have built that deck. I would put interlocking pavers on grade. Why? Because this is also subject to drainage issues. I don't even know how the drainage is handled. Do you have a concentrated drainage in here? Whereas if you had interlocking pavers, it would have just absorbed the water into the ground, just like what it is right now.
Yeah, that's part of the issue, is the water that comes down from the hillside. And
Okay, so drainage has been taken care of, okay?
But there is drainage, to answer your question.
And I don't think this is an privacy issue, as the neighbor mentioned, because again, you can demolish this deck and you can put another pavers on grade, and still you will have enjoy your deck. And of course, you have a fence there, 6 foot, 7 foot, whatever the height is, that provides plenty of privacy from the neighbor.
So that's something else I'm glad you mentioned. In one of the violation notice, they mentioned, even though Mr. Joe indicated otherwise, they had a problem with the fence being within the interior setback. That was one of the violations, fence to be in the interior setback. This judge has been dictating all of the violations. The city attorney is rolling over. And the question here today isn't about construction, isn't about deck. It's about what was the catalyst for this to be changed from an interpretation to now a mistake at my cost, at my expense. It's not about a matter of materials anymore. It's the time and effort. One of the questions you asked why it took 18 months during the pandemic, it took that because, maybe it's because of the pandemic, but lots of back and forth, trying to meet their regulations, and we did it. We did it with a smile on our face, but if the iterations, there's probably 50 iterations of architectural work back and forth. So we were trying to do anything. At a certain point, we were so far into it, you couldn't just back out. But I would like to say, I asked same questions about the paver stones. What if I just remove the deck? It seems like a lot of work. Mr. Sukazian, we don't want you to remove the deck. We want you to enjoy the view, and we want you to and the neighbor to enjoy the view. There was a direct quote from Mr. Miros here today.
Can I ask building and safety staff about that one comment? Mr. Sukazian just mentioned that he needed a permit for the chain link fence. Is that correct?
So I would like to address a couple of comments. The retaining wall. The retaining wall was done, by the way, my staff and planning have spent an exhaustive amount of time to assist you with your deck. When I said I want you to have your deck, we did everything we can within the codes for you to be able to have a deck. When I say I want you to have a deck, that does not mean you're in violation of a code. So when I say I want you to have a deck, by the way, I want you to get all your money back, but I'm obligated by city rules and regulations as to what the city can refund. So back to the question of Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, so Mr. Sukazian mentioned that there was also apparently a code violation for him replacing the chain link fence. Is that correct?
There was, but I need to defer that to, it's mostly a zoning.
I could
Neighborhood
answer
services.
Sure.
So all this time, we've only been discussing the deck issue. Are there any other issues?
Well, I mean, I don't want to focus
No,
on the
I'm asking the
fence.
staff.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chair, I heard multiple questions here. So in regards to the chain link fence, you may have noticed on one of my slides with the work in progress, you'll see the interior line of the fences being removed, and you'll see gaps inside there. So during that time, in neighborhood services revisions to the violation letter, they were issuing that further work had been done with fences, and that was included, and I think the retaining wall as well. I know he mentions that we don't have a problem, and the only reason why we did add the additional fence within the violation notice is, yes, fences below 7 feet do not require a permit. But if you look at my slides, those fences were not 7 feet. I mean, they can go easily, maybe 10 feet plus. And we can go back to my slide. Sure. I'll allow our neighborhood services code inspector, Julio Hernandez.
It was in the middle of the construction of the post. The last thing you do is you cut the post. That's all that's left. You cut the post. That part. Oh, sorry. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when you construct a fence, you typically want to have the post a little bit larger than what's needed, so that way when you finish, everything lines up. If it's too short, you got to start over, essentially, in layman's terms. So when they're saying it's above 7 feet, the majority of the fence is well below 7 feet. It's those posts that they're talking about, but they won't give that distinction. And it's not finished yet. Once we cut them off and finish everything, once we get the approvals, then it's got to definitely be below 7 feet.
So you're acknowledging, though, that the violation was because the posts are currently and the structure is above 7 feet?
No,
That's why it
well,
was.
the violation, no, originally it was the chain link fence. It happened 4 or 5 years ago. Sorry, 4 or 5 years ago, this gentleman here, I have it on text message, demanded that we remove the chain link fence. All we did was we put a chain link fence to match the neighbor's chain link fence. That neighbor's here today too. And that same exact color, height, everything, it's not an issue for their yard. It's an issue for our yard only. And for 5 years, I was harassed by this guy, even though Peter, or one of the higher ups in neighborhood services, sent me an email saying, we're closing your case. It's clear that you have met the intent of the code, because I spent like $1,000 of plants to cover the adjacent parcel thing about the code, about you have to cover the chain link fence. And the inspector at the time, Jay, told me as of 2000, whatever year it was, that I got lucky that the law changed. There's no rules around chain link fence. But most recently, they made me remove it effectively, because they kept telling me to put more plants, but there had been more plants, more vegetation had grown since the time that I had received approval, which is effectively another reversal. Is that another mistake, or is that another change of interpretations? But I have it in writing that I've met the intent of the code, and more plants have grown since that time. You fast forward, I'm demanded in writing to remove the fence. So eventually, to me, it's a cost of doing business. It's not worth the time to constantly go back and forth. I said, forget it. Maybe it just looks better anyways. We put a wood fence, beautiful redwood fence. And that's what we did. And then they got upset about us removing the fence. I said, well, I thought that was the whole point of you said to remove it in the violations. So I'm just trying to get everyone off my back so that the neighbors don't continue their harassment. You know, it's ridiculous. All the other neighbors in the neighborhood love the work. They could see it from the street. They give us thumbs up. One of them actually wanted to be here, and she wants to testify today. She had a passing in her family. She said to call her. If you wanted to do that, you could. A longtime resident of 50 years in the neighborhood, immediate next door neighbor. Okay. These things that are happening to me is not happening to other people. And again, it circles back to the fact that this gentleman here, who's attended 3 civil hearings against me, he shows up every single time to try to testify. The judge always dismisses him. What the other gentleman said is not true. He sent police to my house 15 times. Never once was there construction. I have it in writing from the police. I talked to the sergeants. They said this is just a service order. They continue to run a harassment campaign at my residence, at my family's expense. It's got to stop. And the reason it's continuing is because we can't put closure to these permits. It facilitates their ability to view in and say, yaha, you see? I don't know how to stop it. I've tried to create plants, hedges, walls, fence. You put up a fence, they say they want privacy, but they tell you to take the fence down. I'm at a point where I just...
Mr. Ukasan, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I want to assure you that this is not a harassment issue here. This board is trying to objectively look at your situation, reevaluate what has happened in the last year and a half, whatever, and we are only looking at the fence issue, the deck issue, and the construction. The issue with you and your neighbor, I'm sorry to hear about that, but this is something outside this
But what is
board
the
piece.
catalyst to reverse the decision about the chain link fence?
We already looked at that, and I think you probably know the answer by now. I specifically asked when the building permit was issued, was it inspected and final? The building official said no. So during that time, it doesn't matter what happened. The permit was still pending. A pending permit can be revoked, just like it can be issued by the building official. They have the right to revoke it. So unfortunately, within that 1 week, it could have been 1 year, we don't know, but it so happened in your case, this thing had to come up one day. It's been there we know for years, it's been interpreted differently. But now we found out what the interpretation is, and moving forward, they fixed it. I'm sorry, it's unfortunate that it happened with you. But please, let us continue, and we're trying to put an end to this. So far, we only heard about the deck. I just have a question from the staff about the fence, please. Thank you very much. Could you tell us about the fence issue? Where is the fence? Is it in the front? Is it the side? Is it the same deck or fence issue, or is it somewhere else?
If I could, board members, if I could, just to answer the previous question about the violation, if we could have Julio Hernandez from Neighborhood Services come up. Thank you.
Please.
Hello. We got a complaint but we're talking about 2 different issues here: the fence, the permit, and the chain link fence. It is my understanding that he had talked to a previous inspector that is no longer with the city about the chain link fence. But the code specifically said that if you have a chain link fence adjacent to your neighbor, it has to be screened with vegetation. So it has to be completely covered, not with holes and stuff like that. It has to be completely covered, and that's pretty much the issue with the chain link fence. And like I said, we're talking about 2 different issues here.
And this fence is between it's a common property line fence? Is that what we're...
One of them was at the time. There was another one, but there's another cut section that says if the fence is visible from the public right of way, it's prohibited.
Okay, that will be for facing the street or I mean, this property is a corner lot. It's got a ton of streets around it.
Yeah.
But it looks like there's only one common property line with the neighbor, but the chain link fence is not there right now.
Last time I was there, a portion of it was removed. It was just a post there.
Okay.
So that's what I saw last time I was there.
Okay, now let's hear from the staff.
At the time when I went over there, he made comments that we were conspiring against the neighbor, and at the time we had at times the neighbors call us because we don't have access to see the property from their side. Of if the property owner doesn't let us go into the property, the neighbors can call us and say you can take a look at it from our side, and that's when we go to the property for the person who's complaining about it, and we take photos from that side just to make sure that we're doing our customer service to both sides. We're just in the middle, and it happens to be that he had cameras. He saw me coming from his property, and I can tell you I was there because I got a complaint. Can you come on my side and take photos? That's what I did.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, could you please clarify the fence height and what's there right now and what's proposed? Are they supposed to remove it, replace it with something? What is the issue?
Okay, so Mr. Board, members, Mr. Chair, and members of the board. At the time when the violation was issued and revised, it was in mid-construction. And like I mentioned before, in one of my slides, you can see the boards extending above 7 feet, so that therefore it required a building permit. Now, with the building permit, when the was issued, they're supposed to be 7 feet tall and on the Mr. Sakazian's property and not on the adjacent neighbors. What condition that it is today, I'm not too sure. But I do, I did pass by just for the sake of this this meeting. It does seem like there are other improvements on the site. I mean, it looks like more fencing or something like that, but that's kind of scattered throughout. As far as what is the exact condition right now, and its compliance with work, as our building official, Mr. Lasky, stated, staff has not gone out there to inspect any of the work when it was issued, and as of right now, it's revoked. So
Okay, understood. So what I'm understanding is fence up to 7 foot high, it's permitted along the common property line. And is there any materials that are prohibited, or it can be anything?
that's a great question. That's something I wanted to speak about. We do have a design review process, and usually fences require a fence exemption prior to any construction.
Even though a permit you just mentioned is not required for a fence less than 7 feet.
Correct, but we do require design review exemptions. Or else if it's something that's, out of character or something like that, we would reference our design guidelines. And if it was something, and I'm not saying a redwood fence is absolutely hideous, but I do think some of the photos were not here or there. But if it was something that was not there today, of something we would say, well, if it does require a permit, we would take this before the board, but that we're not here or there. But we do review as far as design for materials.
Well, I'm looking at the building permit, the plans, and it does mention fence, but it doesn't mention anything about the material, or it says wood, it says wood fence.
Correct.
So I assume then a 7-foot wood fence will be permitted.
Correct.
And if the applicant proceeds with this drawing up to 7 feet, then definitely that can be legalized.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Very
And
well, thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other issues with this property? So we have one fence and one deck. Is there others? Because I thought there was 3 items listed here.
It was just the retaining walls, because that requires a permit too, so that's correct.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Are there any other questions for the staff? The applicant? Okay. Please.
Thank you, everyone, for your time and presentation efforts. I'll start by saying I spent quite a bit of time last night looking through the packet and reviewing the materials. I was shocked to see some of the paperwork included. We're not here, we're not a civil court or a criminal court. As Mr. Chair mentioned, we're here to review the permit that was issued and the possible revocation based on the code, and that's in black and white. I'm disappointed the city made a mistake like this, and if I were Mr. Sukazian, I'd be very upset as well. But I do understand the code's in black and white. It wasn't, recently invented or implemented, and it was just a mistake that was made. And by revoking the permit, the city tried to make things right. Quite frankly, being an attorney by training and having worked for state and federal judges, the paperwork I saw and the complaints that did DA because the neighbor's a judge was egregious to me. Quite egregious. Because your neighbor is a judge, he or she would have the ability to go and speak with neighbors. There's nothing wrong with that. Educating people, and just because your neighbor had the wherewithal to hire an attorney or himself or herself research a code that exists within the city of Glendale nothing unethical about that, nothing improper. He brought it to light. And I assume because the letter was written by a formal law firm, the city took a harder glance at it along with the city attorney's office. Quite frankly, you know, whether you're an attorney or a grocery worker, if anyone brought this code to the city's attention and to the city attorney's attention, they would have to take a hard look at it. And again, it's in black and white. It's in black and white. There is a setback of 10 feet. I'm sorry, there are a lot of hard feelings between the neighbors. But my initial reaction is this should have never been constructed. No permit should have been issued. It was revoked, I think correctly revoked. There needs to be maybe alternatives explored between the city of Glendale and the applicant. And I think at the very least, I would suggest the city attorney in conjunction with building and safety and the zoning department, you know, have, you know, a program to educate all the staff to make sure this type of interpretation, misinterpretation doesn't happen again, and perhaps have a process to review past occurrences. I would also, you know, request that if this commission's or this board's inclination is to revoke the permit, that the city staff and city attorney work with the applicant to refund at least some of the permit fees and any additional fees that they've already expended to get this permit. And I'll leave it at that.
So I would say, put that into your motion, as a motion, and I would second it.
Do you have any questions? Do you have any comments?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I agree with Mr. Kashishian questions, and when I notice more than 10 signatures approval, and maybe one mistake, two mistake, three mistake, but all of them mistake, impossible. Beginning, if they have to watch they have to catch the mistakes, then stop, applicant give a permit. And this is my concern. I feel so bad, Mr. Sukasian. And again, you did the right way, but unfortunately, code is changed or something they find out, but they have to find beginning to stop giving you a permit. But whatever Mr. Kashishian recommended, I agree with him. Thank you.
First of all, let me publicly apologize that I've been mispronouncing your name as Sukasian. It's really Sukasian. I'm sorry about that. And secondly, I think to clarify this matter, it's not that this error has occurred so many times. There's an interpretation has been made for many decades or years. The interpretation has been in effect, and all the city staff knows what that 18-inch deck or projection or whatever is. They thought up to 18 inches of deck will be permissible. There was no other reason. I mean, it's true that there are so many stamps here, but again, they were all relying on one interpretation that decks up to 18 inches were exempt. And what happened now, overnight or whatever, the interpretation changes. And moving forward, they're not going to allow, which I'm sorry to hear that, by the way, they're not going to allow any structure within the interior setback. This is not just your case, Mr. Sukasian. This is going to affect the entire city of Glendale. And I bet you there are a ton of constructions like this currently or under construction. Some may or may not even have permits. So this is not just a unique situation. But moving forward, the interpretation has been made, and I would like the city staff to put that in writing for everyone out there to know what they can or what they cannot do. A lot of architects, engineers, designers in this city have interpreted the code exact same ways, including myself. So I want to say that from now on, please let's make sure we put interpretations in writing, codify it, and if need be, put it out there for people to know. Obviously, a lot of construction is going on, especially now. I will conclude with that. Thank you. So, if there are no other comments, questions, the board would like, I would like to entertain a motion to either approve or disapprove the decision of the building official to revoke the permits as issued. If I said that correctly, but I would like a motion to be corrected.
I will move to sustain the building official's decision to revoke building permit number BB 2116642. And along with that decision to sustain, to also have the city attorney work with staff in checking previous records and existing open permits, and educating staff to ensure that this type of mistake doesn't happen again, or misinterpretation doesn't happen again, and to also work with the applicant on the refund of fees expended on their deck project already.
I will second that with a little amendment. If the plaintiff decides to continue with a deck, the permit fees will still apply.
So,
So I will second that motion.
So I'm assuming you're saying that they can work with the city staff to come up with a solution, but
If a solution requires a permit,
then permit
the
fees can be
fees already
waived. This can
apply.
be like a revision to the permit.
yes.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
Do we have to
second.
reword that again?
If we can.
We leave it up to city attorney to reword it.
Okay.
See what's going on.
So there is a motion, a much simpler motion in your packet, but we'd be happy to add these.
Oh.
I believe it's 3, maybe 4, depending on how you look at it, conditions. If I could just repeat, the city attorney will work with staff, planning staff and building and safety staff to check previous records to see if there are any permits that can be corrected moving forward, and to educate staff so that this will not happen again with respect to interpretation of the code, and also to work with the applicant to either refund the fees that he expended for this permit, or to credit the fees that he's already paid to a new permit for the same or similar scope of work.
That's it.
Fair enough.
That's it. Perfect.
So,
She makes the motion, I've seconded.
okay, thank you. Roll call, please.
Roll call. Tertullian. Lee.
Yes.
Kashishian.
Yes.
Galastian.
Yes.
Hanessian.
yes.
Item 8, reports is only informational only. And then item 9, adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
I second the motion.
The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.